Well, folks, it's the month of June, which means the 2024 NHL Entry Draft is just around the corner, occurring at the end of this month at the Sphere in scenic Las Vegas, Nevada. If you're the Calgary Flames or one of their fans, you're pretty excited about this year's draft because, to be blunt, they've got a lot of picks. The Calgary Flames have 2 selections in each of the first 4 rounds of the 2024 Entry Draft, including 6 picks in the top 100 selections of the draft and 9 overall. For a team that's entering the first year of their long-awaited rebuilding process, it's a chance to really jumpstart things. But if you're the Flames, who you pick and why you pick them will be dependent on what you feel like you have in your system right now. So, in the interest of providing a bit of a preview of the upcoming festivities, let's dive into what the Flames currently have in their prospect pool. First of all, let's acknowledge 4 players that were previously considered prospects by our considerations, but have graduated from that list. These 4 guys are no longer eligible for consideration for the Calder Trophy as the NHL's top rookie, and that's sort of the mindset we're looking at for what's considered a prospect. You got to be able to win the Calder to be a prospect. So these 4 guys have graduated from the list. The foursome includes Matt Coronato, Jacob Pelche, Connor Zary, and Martin Pospisil. Obviously, Pospisil and Zary basically became full-time NHLers this past season. They got called up in early November and were basically impossible to take out of the lineup outside of injuries. Whereas, Pelche and Coronado sort of had a bit more of a bumpy experience. Pelche missed a bunch of time due to injury, and Coronado was sort of up and down from the NHL throughout the year, but he showed a lot of improvement. So those 4 guys are no longer considered prospects. They're considered, I guess, young pros, but they're not really guys that you would consider as prospects simply because of their experience level. For those who aren't familiar, to be eligible for the Calder, you can't have played more than 25 games in a regular season, in a single season, and you can't have played more than 6 games in any 2 seasons. Pelche, he hit more than 6 games in consecutive seasons. Coronado, Zary, and Pospisil all exceeded the single season games played mark, so that's why none of these guys are getting included. All right, let's move on to the Flames goaltenders. We'll go in age range from oldest to youngest prospects. First up, Dustin Wolf. We don't really need to say a lot about Dustin Wolf. Everyone knows who Dustin Wolf is. If you're a Flames fan, and if you're not, welcome. Dustin Wolf's really good. Dustin Wolf split the 23-24 season between the NHL and the AHL. He played about a third of the year on the big club and 2/3 of the year in the AHL. Since being drafted in 2019, he's played 5 years of hockey. 4 of those years, he was the goalie of the year in the league he was playing in. And in 22-23, he was named the most valuable player in the American Hockey League. He's really, really good. He's still considered widely one of the top young goaltenders in professional hockey, and we'll see what that translates into when he gets more of a bite at the apple of the NHL level, but he's good. We can't really dress it up too much. New face coming to the Flames organization this coming year, Valtteri Ignatiu, a Finnish player coming out of the Swedish feeder leagues. He was playing most recently last year with Mora in Hockey Allsvenskan in the second tier Swedish hockey. Really good numbers the last couple of years. He played a year in Finland and a year in Sweden. He's sort of been bouncing around a bit, but the Flames signed him for organizational depth. Really good numbers at low levels of hockey, but the AHL will easily be the highest level of hockey he's played in, and we'll see how he reacts, but he's definitely earned the opportunity to get to this level. Finally, we got 3 Russian players to close out the goaltending ranks. One of them, 2020 4th-round pick, Danil Chechelev, probably destined to go back to Europe. He has a contract with HC Vityaz in that organization. He spent last year in Ryazan in Vityaz's organization, their minor league team. He's sort of bounced around a bit. He's one of those players where he had really good numbers as a young Russian player, but the way politics work in Russian hockey is in a lot of European leagues, but especially Russian hockey, if they think you might not be coming back, you might not get the developmental opportunities that a lot of their younger players get. So as a result, we simply just did not see a lot of Danil Chechelev the last couple of years. He's played a bit in the ECHL, a tiny bit in the AHL, but he's mostly been sort of depth. He seems like a guy who'll be in Europe, and maybe he pops and maybe he doesn't, but the Flames hold on to his rights for a while. profile based on just the weird quagmire that the AHF transfer agreement or lack thereof is between the NHL and Russia. Next up, Arseny Sergeyev. He is just finished up his second year in college at UConn. He's transferred to Penn State. Really good young goaltender. He's shown some flashes of brilliance, but his consistency hasn't been there yet. But the numbers for someone his age and his relative level of experience have been really solid. And to close it out, Yegor Yegorov, who's been playing in MHK Dynamo Moskva, which is the junior affiliate of Dynamo Moscow. He's good. He's been playing pretty good hockey in the last few years. He really got more minutes last year. He's a young Russian goaltender. He's actually the youngest player the Flames have under team control. He's an August 2005 birthday, so he's extremely, extremely, extremely young. Won't even turn 19 until about 2 months after this year's draft. He's got a lot of runway in front of him to develop because he's so young, and for him, it's just a question of, because of the situation he's in as an NHL drafted player in the Russian system, will he get a lot of those pro opportunities to really show that he can play at higher levels? Because at the U20 level, as a junior goaltender, he's been very, very good. But typically at that age, maybe you see some of these guys get a little bit of pro opportunities, whether it's been the KHL or the VHL. He hasn't had those yet, so we'll see if he does. But Yegor Yegorov is one of those guys that's very quietly a really exciting prospect in the system, but it's just a question of, can they get him those developmental opportunities to show that he can maybe work a little bit higher up in the rotation at some point. All right, on to the defensemen. The Flames have a lot of defensemen. When Craig Conroy started the season, you could make a really strong argument that defensive depth organizationally was one of their big challenges. They had a really good NHL group, but obviously with a lot of departures of existing defensemen, they did not have Oliver Shillington for the first 75% of the year. They lost Nikita Zadorov, Chris Tanev, and Noah Hanifin to trades, and as a result, it's sort of stretched the depth a bit. But I think they've done a pretty good job at adding defensemen to their work list in the last little while, the reserve list. So first up, Ilya Solovyov, Belarusian defenseman. He was drafted as an overager. He went to the KHL for a year. Then he came in and he's played, he's a pending RFA. He's played 3 years in the Flame system. He's done a really good job. He's one of those guys where his game isn't really sexy. He's sort of a physical defense first shutdown defenseman. His points are basically a bonus. He's not going to be a guy that makes or breaks your power play, for example. He's the guy who's on the other side killing penalties, and he got a chance to play in the NHL for 10 games this year, and he was pretty good. He didn't blow the doors off, but he's not in a position where you'd expect a D first defenseman to really be impressive, but he's sort of got some Chris Tanev in his DNA, and I think if you're the Flames, you're hoping, okay, maybe you can turn him or one of the other defensive-minded guys into another Chris Tanev. Next up, Jake Boltman. Jake Boltman is in a weird situation in that he's already finished 4 years of college. I believe he's graduated, so the Flames, I believe, are going to be losing his rights on August 15th unless they sign him. Who knows what happens? He's going to go back to college for a year for his, I believe he's heading to Northeastern as a transfer, so I don't think he gets a contract simply because of his situation with school, and so the Flames might lose his rights. Collegiate rights are kind of a mess because it doesn't depend on years after drafting. It depends on how close you are to graduating, and I believe he's graduated, but we'll see. Boltman, another defense first guy, his numbers in college never really popped at all. He's one of those guys that you looked at his potential and his physical profile and went, maybe he could become a pretty functional two-way defenseman at the NHL level. And it didn't really pop for him in college, and usually you have to have decent college numbers to get a chance to be a decent AHL or NHL defenseman. It just didn't pop for Boltman, unfortunately. Next up, Yan Kuznetsov. Yan Kuznetsov is another one of these guys, sort of fits the defense first profile. I would call Yan Kuznetsov the poor man's Ilya Solovyov, and that's no disrespect to either player. As you can tell from my Solovyov discussion, I'm a fan of the player. I really like how he projects. Kuznetsov isn't quite as good at the stuff that Solovyov is good at, but he's not bad. Like he's a pretty solid all-around defender, but I think the challenge for him is, he's not as strong at his strengths as some of the other guys in their system. so it makes it a little bit challenging to sort of be enthusiastic about his upward mobility. He played an NHL game this year. He was fine, but he didn't really stand out. He didn't get the opportunities that Solovyov did to get more NHL time, but, he wasn't quite as good in the AHL when he was down there. So it's just a question of, can Kuznetsov find a bit of traction in his development? Yoni Yermo is another guy that is new to the Flames organization. The Flames acquired him from Vancouver in the Elias Lindholm trade. It's hard to know what to make of him. He sort of bounced around Finnish hockey a bit. He's definitely got something to his game. He's a really reliable two-way guy. I don't know if he's probably a little bit better offensively than a lot of the other guys in their system who are defensive-minded guys, but he's not quite as good defensively as the defensive-minded guys, and he sort of falls into that sort of middle ground between a cluster of defensemen the Flames have that project as offensive guys and a cluster of defensemen they have that project as defensive guys. So we'll see what Yoni Yermo does. He's going to have given an opportunity to carve out a spot for himself at the pro level, but he's one of those guys that probably will have a bit of a challenge, but that's why they play the games. You never know when a guy's going to pop like that, right? Jeremy Poirier is up next. Jeremy Poirier is a guy that a lot of folks around the organization are pretty high on, and unfortunately he missed a giant chunk of time this year due to a pretty nasty skate cut he got on his wrist, to the point where they were initially worried that, oh guys, this guy's gonna be able to play again, and then okay, when will he be able to play again? And I think they're pretty excited that he's able to work his way back from that injury, because it was pretty scary on the ice. There was a ton of blood. Don't look for the video, it's gross. Poirier was one of those offensive-minded guys we alluded to. Really up-tempo offensive player, good on the power play, good puck movement. A lot of his game depends on confidence and judgment. He's one of those guys that he's going to make 3 or 4 really nice plays with a puck per game, but he's also probably going to make 1 or 2 not-so-nice plays with the game. And the risk-reward in his game kind of reminds me a little bit of Oliver Shillington early in his career, where you sort of have to figure out, basically grill into him sort of a better sense of what he can and can't get away with. But there's definitely a lot to be enthusiastic about. It's a bit disappointing he missed a year of development, but he's real good. Artem Grushnikov came over to the Flames in the Chris Tanev trade with Dallas. He's sort of in the same vein of Solovyov and Kuznetsov. I believe he's about 3 years younger than Solovyov. Very similar style, big, physical, defensive. Not a lot of offensive upside to him, but he sort of projects again as sort of a Chris Tanev type. And I think the hope is probably that because he's a few years behind, Solovyov in age, that you can probably see him coming along a little bit later on, maybe a year or two, sort of the same way that Solovyov took a couple years to really pop at the pro level. So they're enthusiastic about him. There's not a lot of offensive upside, but I think they like the profile of the player. Hunter Brustevich came over from Vancouver in the Elias Lindholm trade. He was a second-team All-Star in the OHL this year. He was top 10 in points. He was second in points among defensemen, only behind Zane Parekh. He's real good. He's pure offense. You wouldn't put him on the PK most likely at the pro level, but he's really smart with the puck, really good mobility, really good passer. His shot, it's fine, but he's more of a distributor than a shooter, but he's got a lot of upside to his game, really good awareness. He's the kind of player that I think they're really enthusiastic about, but I think, based on the things he was able to accomplish at the junior level, he probably needs a bit of time at the pro level to sort of fill out physically and learn essentially how to battle his way into the positions that allowed him to be so damn good with the puck in junior. So he's a bit of a medium-term project. I don't think he's going to be in the NHL right away, but I think they really like his upside. Etienne Morin, 2023 pick, had kind of a rough year last year. He was over a point per game in his draft year in the Q with Moncton. He didn't really click this year. It was one of those years where nothing tends to go in for teams. His shooting percentage dropped a bit. It was just one of those things where, sometimes things click and sometimes things don't, but he still put a lot of pucks on that. And I think the fact that he has the puck so much and that he's able to do a lot with it gives you some confidence that there's some developmental upside there. But he's one of those guys that I think they're really optimistic about how he projects. Finally, Axel Hertig was a late round pick in 2023. I believe he's their 7th rounder. Big, burly, defense-first defenseman. Played in Sweden last year. He's on his way to join the Calgary Hitmen of the Western League in the 24-25 as an import. He's big. Again, another one of those sort of defensive archetype guys. Not expect to be a huge point producer, but he projects to be someone who's sort of an all arounder with a bit of a skew towards the defensive side of the game. But he's only really played in Europe, and he's only really played very little pro. I think he played a bit of the SHL and a teeny tiny bit in the third tier hockey Atan. So he's kind of, you don't really have what of sense he'll be in sort of the smaller ice in the Western League with a bit more of a physical, bump, crash and bang kind of style to it. So we'll see how he adapts to that. I think this coming season will really show how Hertig can adapt and whether or not there's, legitimate NHL upside to his game or not. It's time for the forwards. First up, Ben Jones. Ben Jones, he's a pending Group 6 free agent, so he might not be with the organization for very much longer, which would be kind of a shame because Ben Jones has just been a really good soldier for the Wranglers the last 2 seasons. I would argue there's nothing sexy about his game, but that's the lack of sexiness is kind of the best thing about him because you can use him anywhere, up and down the lineup, top, basically anywhere in the top 3 lines. He can play center. He can kill penalties. He can be on your power play. He's basically a Swiss Army knife. I think the big challenge, the thing that I would say is arguably a knock against him is just he doesn't have anything that you really want to hang your hat on in terms of a high-end attribute. I would argue his high-end attribute is his adaptability, but I'm not making the hockey ops decisions. Sam Morton just came over to the Wranglers at the end of the season from Minnesota Mankato. He's under an NHL contract starting next year, so he'll be a legitimate NHL possibility. I really like Sam Morton's game. He came over. He's a center. He came in as a tryout before his contract began next season, and he joined the Wranglers. And he was the only tryout guy who basically they couldn't take out of the lineup at the end of the season. Trent Cull, the head coach of the Wranglers, said on 960 that basically, Sam Morton gave them a bunch of life when they really needed it. They were sort of in the slog of the last chunk of the season, and Sam Morton came in and really gave them a jolt. And he was never bad enough to take out of the lineup, and that says a lot about his game. I don't know what his upside is. He's basically only played a handful of pro games. And a lot of them are at the end of the season. A lot of them are playoffs. So it's hard to really tell, was he going to be like in December of an AHL schedule, but I'm kind of optimistic about his upside. But he seems like he could just be at probably decent organizational depth that we'll see. It's always difficult to figure out how guys project. Case in point, the next guy on the list, Riley Damiani, came over from Dallas. He got swapped at the trade deadline for Emilio Pettersson. Damiani, center, good 200-foot center. He had a really good first pro year. He was, I believe, named to the all-rookie team in the AHL, got called up to the NHL briefly. But he hasn't really followed it up with the kind of performances that keep you in the call-up conversation, unfortunately, and I think that's kind of what led to his trade. Emilio Pettersson is probably in a very similar situation with the Flames organization with all the wingers they had. So, Damiani, the nice thing about him is that he's a smart two-way player, and he kind of understands that role in the American League level. I don't know what kind of an NHL upside he has, simply because, I think there's going to be guys that are ahead of him in the pecking order, both for, two-way positions and guys who the Flames potentially see as higher in the rotation, as their upside. But, at the very least, Damiani's a productive, reliable AHLer. Adam Klapka basically had the best first 2 seasons of pro I think anyone could have hoped for. He came in as a unsigned European free agent in the summer of 22-23. He basically spent the first half figuring out the AHL. Second half of the year, he's fantastic. Just a really good, reliable, consistent, offensive-minded player. You wouldn't want him killing penalties. He's much better in the middle 2 zones, the neutral zone and the offensive zone than he is in his own zone. So you probably need to put him with someone who's got some two-way savvy to him as a center. But he's got size. He knows how to use it. He's got a good shot. He knows how to play with the puck, and he knows where to be in order to allow his teammates to find him, and just that awareness I think will give him some NHL upside. He was the leading scorer for the Wranglers this past season. He played a handful of games in the NHL, had a goal in a fight. He was good. And I think he's the kind of guy that you look at. They don't have a lot of right shot centers in the organization. The list is basically Klapka right now in terms of depth players. And I think that'll give him a lot of opportunities to potentially play at the NHL level. Cole Schwindt's up next. Cole Schwindt came over from Florida in the Matthew Tkachuk trade. I feel bad for Cole Schwindt because he kind of had a challenging first year in the Flames organization to the point where I think a lot of folks forgot about him. But, I think he did a really good job asserting himself this season and carving out a niche. Right shot center, can also play the wing, really versatile, really reliable. I think he projects as sort of more of a two-way center. I would say, imagine Backlund, if Backlund is from Ontario, maybe not quite the offensive upside of a Michael Backlund, but Schwindt can play up and down the lineup. He can play every game situation, and he's really consistent. And he was able to win a lot of key faceoffs with the Wranglers down the stretch. And when the Wranglers lost a lot of their key guys to the NHL down the stretch, especially guys that could play up the middle, I think Schwindt did a really good job stepping in and assuming a larger role and really grabbing hold of it. So we'll see what he does in the coming seasons, but he's, for an organization that doesn't have a lot of right shot centers, I think he did a good job getting himself in that conversation. And, we'll see what kind of summer he has. Ilya Nikolaev is a player on the Flames reserve list. He played most of his first year of his entry level in the ECHL. He spent most of this season in the AHL, but was a frequent healthy scratch, got sent down to the ECHL to play with Rapid City down the stretch. Didn't play in the playoffs, didn't play a lot. He's holding on, but he's not really a guy that I think is a prospect of note. No disrespect to him, but he's sort of lost in the shuffle right now, and he'll need a big summer and then a big training camp to really get himself back in the conversation. Rory Cairns came to the Flames as a late-round pick. He was very good offensively in the OHL. He spent his first year pro in the ECHL with Rapid City. Had pretty good numbers when he was healthy. He came in this year to the Wranglers. Didn't really play a lot early in the season. When the call-ups and injuries started, he started getting a lot of a larger role. He's really good offensively. He is a really interesting player that, he's kind of one-dimensional, but the only thing he needs to work on is consistency, because when he's on his offensive game, when he's creating, when he's opening up opportunities for his teammates, in terms of an offensive-minded player, there's few guys that can pop off the page as well as he can. I think the big challenge for him is just figuring out how to do that all the time, because if he can do that most of the time, he's good enough at what he does that he could probably get a look at the NHL. But I think the big challenge for a lot of the young guys is figuring out what you can do consistently and then doing it consistently. And Cairns, he's working on it. Lucas Siona was captain of the Seattle Thunderbirds a year ago when they won the WHL championship and played for the Memorial Cup. They didn't win, but he came to the AHL this year. It was an up and down year for him. He's not a guy that's going to put a lot of pucks in the net at this level, and I think he had to figure out a lot of, what's the AHL game all about? And he didn't really have the consistency to stay in the lineup down the stretch, especially when the Wranglers got a lot of guys back from injury and back from the Flames. Siona was the odd man out, and he watched a lot of hockey down the stretch, and you're kind of hoping that he was the kind of guy who had the wherewithal in the Western League to come in as a young player, not play a lot, but really learn a lot in his first couple of years in the league, to the point where he became a useful enough player for the Thunderbirds that he was their captain. He was excellent in the Western League because he was able to adapt and learn and adjust. And we'll see if he's able to do that in his second AHL year, because he wasn't bad, but he wasn't good enough to be an everyday guy. William Stromgren had the kind of season this year that Adam Klapka had a year ago. He came over from Sweden from Europe, and his first North American pro year. Basically, he spent the first few months figuring it out. Second half of the season, he had it figured out. He was very good for the Wranglers down the stretch, one of the more consistent players at a time where they really needed consistent offensive players on their team. He faded a little bit in the playoffs. He wasn't quite as good against Coachella Valley as he was against Tucson in the first round, but he really did a good job raising his stock. I think he was a guy that a lot of outsiders sort of saw size, you saw the potential, but you hadn't really seen him put it all together. Especially, he was sort of more of a complementary player in Sweden. But this year, he really, I think, opened a lot of eyes in terms of what he can become as a pro. And so, just a matter of seeing how he follows it up in his second year. Parker Bell spent the majority of the year in Tri-City of the Western League. He was sort of in a similar situation as Lucas Ciona was this year, where both of them were potential overagers in the Western League. They kept Ciona up, I think, because Ciona had all the playoff success he needed to have, and there wasn't really anything left for Ciona to do at the Western League level. Parker Bell hadn't really topped out yet at the Western League level, and I think they wanted to give him a chance to go back and finish strong. He had a good year. He was one of Tri-City's better players, really consistent, difference-making guy for them more often than not. Basically what you would expect and hope from an overage player in the Western League. He's got size. He's still pretty raw. Big kid. I think he still needs to fill out a little bit, so we'll see what he does. He's. I think the challenge for Bell will be figuring out, okay, how can I stay in the lineup and avoid sort of being a spectator? Because I think, again, that's sort of the challenge that Ciona had down the stretch. As you learn and adapt, how do you turn those lessons into becoming an everyday player rather than being a spectator? Cade Littler had a kind of a weird year. He started in the USHL. Had good numbers, I think they wanted to try something else different, so he went back to the BCHL, where he joined the powerhouse Penticton Vs, and then he played pretty well. His numbers weren't amazing, but they were solid, but his numbers were down a bit from the year before in Wenatchee. Then he got hurt, and he was sort of, by the time he got back into it, he sort of settled into sort of a second, third line center role on a pretty good junior team. He did his role well, but I think if you're projecting a player, you kind of want to see a bit more offensive production from him. He's off to college next year at the University of North Dakota, so he's a longer term project. So he's got size, he's got a lot of intangibles that I think hockey folks like, and we'll see. He's a long term project for the Flames. Sam Honzik, another guy that had a weird year. First round pick in 2023, the first player that Craig Conroy has ever drafted as the GM. And he was hurt most of the year. He had an abdominal injury he suffered at the end of Flames preseason, which basically took him out till December. He played for a couple weeks, went to the World Juniors, came back, got hurt. Basically, I think he got whacked in the face. He had some sort of a facial injury, so he had to wear a bubble for the rest of the season. Tough year for Honzik. He managed to come back and play a little bit for the Wranglers in the end of the season and the postseason. I think there's the kind of season where you compare this season to how Connor Zari's 19/20-year-old season, his first year pro was, where you go, well, the injuries basically derailed a lot of the momentum he could have had. And I think you basically just try to take the positives from what he did do and just burn the tape and hope that next year's a little bit better. He's big, he's got smarts, potential for some versatility, but it's just a question of he just needs to play games in order to figure out what he is. Another guy the Flames are pretty high on, and I think rightfully so, from the 23 draft is Idar Suniev. Another guy who came out of the BCHL. He played with Penticton last season and had amazing offensive numbers. Transitioned to UMass in the NCAA. Started off as sort of more of a third line winger, sheltered pretty well. Power play, a lot of offensive situations. And then as the season went on, I think, Coach Greg Carville seemed to trust him a bit more, so he got sheltered a little bit less and moved his way onto the first line. He was really good for them down the stretch. I think Carville's comments. Carville did a interview with Post Media's Wes Gilbertson, where I think he mentioned, I forget his exact phrasing, but it was something along the lines of, Suniev's the kind of guy who always knows how to score, and just for him, it's just a question of figuring out the other parts of the game, figuring out how to check, figuring out where you need to be away from the puck. How do you do things in the other zones, because offensively he's really good, and the numbers for a true freshman, pretty impressive. It's just a matter of how do you follow it up. And last but not least, Vancouver Giants forward Jaden Lipinski, teammates with Sam Honzik at Vancouver. Really, really good player, sneaky good even. Another 2023 pick, right shot center who can also play the wing. He was, remember how I mentioned how often Honzik was injured or missing for the Giants this year? Lipinski is one of those guys that really had to fill in the gaps when a lot of Vancouver's big guns were missing or injured or whatever. And he did a tremendous job doing that. He was one of the better face-off players in the entire Western League. Took a lot of face-offs, won a lot of face-offs, especially in key moments. Point per game while playing in basically every game situation. They asked a lot of Lipinski this year, and he delivered. So he's the kind of guy where I don't know what he projects as a pro. He's got some size to him. He's got some mobility. I think like a lot of guys who transition from junior, he's going to need to work on sort of the details of his game and how they, how do his junior details that were so good, how do they get adapted to the pro game where it's a bit more physical, everyone's a little bit faster and meaner and better. But he set himself off on a really nice note with a pretty strong year in the Western League. He might go back as an overager. He might go to the AHL. I don't think that's really been determined yet. And to be honest, his play in Flames camp might be what determines that. So it's going to be a big summer for Lipinski. So what do the Flames need in terms of the draft? The short answer is everything. You could make a case that they're okay for goaltenders, and I would say they're kind of okay for goaltenders right now. Dustin Wolf is the goaltender of the future. He might be the goaltender of the very near present. And behind him, they have some interesting projects, but not necessarily anyone that makes you go, okay, that might be the guy who steps in and is the man for the Wranglers, for example. So I could see them potentially looking at a late round goaltender simply because why not? If it's up to me, you take a goalie in the 6th or 7th rounds every year just because you can. In terms of their defensive group, they have sort of two groups of defensemen, two clusters. They have a handful of defensive defensemen, Solovyov, Kuznetsov, Grushnikov, guys like that. I put Axel Hurtig in that group. They also have another group of guys that are their offensive-minded guys. Guys like Poirier, Bruce Devich, Morin. I would argue they don't really have a tippity-top, high-end blue-chip guy. They have a lot of guys that could turn out well, but no one that makes you go, hot damn, that's the guy, that's the next Phaneuf, that's the next Al McInnes, that's the next Rasmus Anderson, that's the next, they don't have a guy like that it makes you as enthusiastic. And so this is when you have 8 picks in the first 4 rounds, that's a good chance to rectify that a bit. Similar with the forwards, they have a lot of guys that sort of project as secondary forwards, the guys who are playing in your bottom 6 or your middle 6 on the wings or at center, but no one you can really necessarily build things around. I'm really high on Sam Honzik. I really like his game. I don't know if he's much better than, let's say he could be a Michael Frolik. I love Michael Frolik. Michael Frolik was a great hockey player. I don't know if you want Michael Frolik playing your first line, for example. If he's playing your first line, you might have some depth issues. But Michael Frolik, really good pro. And I think the Flames look up and down their depth chart and go, there's a lot of guys that project to be really good pros potentially. I don't know if there's any guys that project to be difference-making pros. And I think that's, to me, the big thing they can rectify in the 24 draft is that they have enough picks early on that they could bet on some guys that can not only just fill out their reserve list and their depth chart a bit, but guys that could potentially be difference makers at various levels. And so they don't have a lot of, great centers. They have some good centers. They don't have a lot of guys that project as great centers. They have some good wingers. They have guys that project as good wingers. I don't know if they have any guys that project as great wingers. Same with defense. So I'd argue, again, a little of everything could be the play in this year's draft because I don't think they're positionally deep at enough positions that they can thumb their nose at anyone if they're the best player available. And so I'm really fascinated to see what the Flames can do in Vegas in terms of just beefing up their reserve list because you're 1 or 2 strong picks away at forward and at defense and maybe one, mid to late round pick and goal away from looking at their depth chart and going, ooh, this is a team that could be a scary good prospect base in a year or 2. But they're not there yet. They're, good, but they're not scary good. And I think the difference between a rebuild, retool, whatever that works and that doesn't is being able to go into these drafts and do your business well and intelligently and effectively and turning a reserve list that looks pretty good into a reserve list that looks scary good. So we'll see what they end up doing at the draft, but it's going to be a really exciting month a really exciting weekend in Vegas, and I think a really exciting and important offseason for the Flames. And so it's going to be really, really interesting to see what Craig Conroy and his staff ends up doing between now and when the pucks drop in October.